Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Nasdaq Spotlight. I'm your host, Craig Byll, member and marketing co-lead of Nasdaq's Global Link of Black Employees Network. Today, we welcome Henri Pierre-Jacques, co-founder and managing partner of Harlem Capital. Henri, thank you so much for joining us in honor of Black History Month.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
Henri, can you please share with us Harlem Capital's mission and who it serves?
Yes, our mission is the change the face of entrepreneurship by investing in 1,000 diverse founders over 20 years. And so we were pretty intentional about making sure we had a timeline, a number, and some objective that we felt like needed to change. And that really is what guides the firm. It's really what drives us on a day-to-day basis besides making returns for our LPs. And ultimately to us, like what diverse means is who are the founders in the US that are underserved. And so for us, that's Black and Latino men and then women of all races, right? And so historically, those groups have been receiving 2-3% total of the dollars, even though they represent 70+% of the US population, right? And you kind of expand that globally and the percentage is even higher. And so it doesn't really make sense to us from a meritocracy standpoint that these founders are not receiving the capital to scale their businesses. And so that's why we kind of chose that subgroup to focus on. And obviously, as diverse partners and individuals, like we identify with those groups, we understand their journeys, and many of our friends are, founders who are kind of going through these challenges as underrepresented founders.
As a Haitian American from Detroit, how has financial literacy and access to capital been a driver of your career trajectory as an entrepreneur? What barriers did you have to overcome?
Yeah, my mom, instilled it in me pretty young. So I actually took a stock class when I was in middle school. My mom had me read this book called Cash Flow, which is a book I definitely recommend, Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and the game is called Cash Flow, actually. And so my mom really instilled like a lot of these like lessons of investing early on, and it's what led to me buying my first real estate property in college, getting into investment banking. And so I think having the foundation around you is really important. Obviously, for a lot of Black communities in particular, that's not always the case, right? And so if you can't get it at home, then are you getting in the classroom? Probably not, because America's education system doesn't teach you about personal finance, right? And so then when you go to, you probably either get a mentor, which also isn't always available in your community. And so you go online, right? You listen to people who you don't know. And so like for me, even now, like I'm constantly following people on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. And so you try to curate the content that you have in order for you to learn these things, whether it's through books, which I don't like reading personally as much. And so I am much more of a online Twitter article person, right? And so you got to find like, what's the methodology that suits you? And, sitting down and reading a 200, 300 page finance book, like isn't interesting to me. And I'm sure it's not for many people. There's nothing wrong with that, right? A lot of smart people would tell you like, read these books. But like, it doesn't mean that like, you're not, smart if you don't like want to sit and read those books. And so I think just be really intentional about like, what ways do you learn? And then like curate the content through that method to best teach yourself, those lessons and skills.
In 2020, Crunchbase found that only 2.6% of venture capital funding goes to Black founders. In the past year, we're finally seeing an increase in funding for Black investors and entrepreneurs. What do you think are the catalysts behind this? And how does Harlem Capital play a part?
Yeah, so we're actually releasing our 2021 diversity report next week. So quick preview. So $3.1 billion went to Black founders last year that raised at least $1 million. That was roughly across 110 different investment rounds, which is a dramatic increase. It's 3 times what 2020 was, right? And so I think there's a number of things that led to that. Obviously, the first is George Floyd and the racial awakening of the US. I think number 2 is a number of larger firms, the Tigers and Co-Cs, the hedge funds of the world, have pushed the later stage funds to move earlier. And so you're seeing more and more funds do the seed, Series A, Series B rounds, which is helping minority founders. And I think 3 is COVID, right? And so you're in a world now where capital is less centralized. And I moved to Miami last year. I was in New York for 8 years. Now I live in Miami. And our team's in 5 cities. We're in New York, DC, Cleveland, LA, and Miami, right? And so you've got teams that are much more dispersed. And so you don't have to be in the Valley or in New York in order to get capital, right? And that's going to always benefit diverse founders because the Valley is not diverse, right? And so the more that capital can be decentralized, that's beneficial for underserved communities. Now, there is a caveat to that because last year, women founders actually, on a percentage basis, received less than the previous year. And so, like, there are downsides as well to like not being able to meet those VCs and being remote, because in a remote world, people also do go back to like what they know. And so I think, but between those three different things, I think that really is what accelerated the 3x growth in Black funding last year. Now, the big question that everybody's trying to answer is this, a moment, or is this a movement, as the mayor of Miami would say? And so I think 2022 and 2023 will really tell you and show you like, hey, is this capital sustained, or is this a response to the post-George Floyd era, right? And nobody really knows the answer to that yet. Like, we're closely watching it. Harlem Capital, like, this is our mission. We've been doing this for 6 years. We've invested in 39 Black, Latino, women-led companies. Like, we plan to do this for the rest of our lives. And so, like, whether it's a moment or movement, is not going to change how we operate as a fund. But obviously, the rest of the ecosystem does impact like how we as a firm like look at the market.
Henri, as a Harvard MBA graduate and a Forbes 30 under 30 business founder with many years of experience as a private equity investment professional, what advice do you have for building wealth, particularly within the Black community, which has been statistically disadvantaged as a result of racial inequality?
Yeah, I would say you can't be what you can't see. And a big reason why Harlem Capital is so visible and we do a lot of branding and content is because like the past generation didn't have that luxury. A lot of people don't know who those top managers are that are Black at these firms. Like, people didn't know Robert Smith before like 2014 when he was on the cover of Forbes, right? He already was very successful at that point. And so I think for us, it's like we want to be a beacon for other people of color who want to be investors. We want to be a beacon for people who are working jobs who potentially want to be founders and they're afraid there's nobody there to fund them because all they hear are the stats of 2% of funding or 0.1% of funding goes to Black women. Like, that doesn't encourage you to want to be a founder, right? And it's like, what are you doing to like encourage these underserved groups to like actually take the risk and believe that they have a chance? Like, that's why we are so visible and vocal. And I just think that's true for like others. Like, can you, and I think mentorship is great, but I think as a venture capitalist, like, I'm always thinking about scale, right? And like, for me, like, it's an accomplishment if one of my interns or one of my founders races around or gets a job, but like, that's not success to me. Like, right, success to me is 1,000 or hundreds of founders getting to the late stage funding. Success for me is dozens or hundreds of interns getting jobs in venture capital, right? And so I'm always thinking about how do you scale versus like one-on-one mentorship, which is fine. But like, given how disenfranchised the Black community is, like, we don't frankly have time for one-on-one mentorship, right? And so I think that's like my view is like, try to be a beacon for as many people as possible and try to find ways, like, if you are in those seats like myself where you're privileged, that you can help more than just the person who works at your firm. You can help more than just like the person, whoever your friend's son, right? Like, there just has to be a much faster acceleration. Otherwise, like, nothing's going to change. Like, we're going to continue to have this gap, right? It's a gap, like, which means whatever's on top is also moving up. And so like, you have to move up faster to close the gap. You can't just be like increasing at the same propensity you were before.
On behalf of Nasdaq, I'd like to thank Henri Pierre-Jacques for joining us today.
Thanks, Greg.
Nasdaq followers, please stay tuned for more coverage during Black History Month, coming to you from Nasdaq channels. Until next time, we are signing off.